The Graveyard Sculptor. Whispers among the tombstones. I first heard the rumor on a rainy autumn night. A coworker, drenched from the downpour, slipped into the corner booth at our favorite diner and leaned across the table. She whispered about statues appearing in the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. Statues that looked too real, as though the sculptor had captured the final gasp of life itself. I'd always had a strange fascination with graveyards, the quiet gloom, the history etched on every stone. But the story she told made me shiver. These statues seemed to materialize overnight, each carved with an expression of palpable terror. No one knew who was responsible, though some claimed to have glimpsed a shadowy figure lurking among the tombstones in the moonlight. Intrigued and a little unnerved, I decided to see for myself. With my camera in hand, I set out to document the bizarre phenomenon. Each step I took on the gravel path sounded like an echo in my mind, growing louder as I approached the wrought iron gates of Maplewood Cemetery. Something was off right from the start. A hush that was too absolute, a stillness that made the hair on my arms prickle. Yet, it wasn't just the eerie calm of the place. It was the presence of something else, something unseen. Though the wind scarcely stirred, I felt as if I were being watched, followed even. And every so often, I thought I heard a faint scraping noise echo between the tombstones. A slow, rhythmic rasp, like a chisel drawn against stone. The first statue. The moment I passed through the cemetery gates, I spotted it. A statue that hadn't been there before. The statue depicted a man, eyes wide, mouth agape in a silent scream. The craftsmanship was incredible. Every detail, from the creases in his brow to the tension in his clenched fists, seemed too precise to be just a simple carving. It was as if a living person had been turned to stone. I found myself rooted to the spot, my flashlight beam shaking slightly as I inspected the figure. The expression was so realistic it felt wrong to keep looking, like intruding on someone's private moment of fear. Despite the chill creeping up my spine, I forced myself closer, searching for any clue of the artist's identity. There was no signature, no marking, nothing at all to explain its sudden appearance. What disturbed me most was the rumor. The sculptor's chisel works only on those who wander the tombstones after midnight. I recalled the words as if they had been etched into my own thoughts. Was this statue once a living soul who dared to tread here after dark? The idea was ridiculous, yet I couldn't shake the disquieting feeling that the rumor might hold a sliver of truth. A sudden gust of wind made the branches overhead groan. My heartbeat thumped in my ears, and I backed away from the statue, feeling strangely exposed. I resolved to keep going. Part of me needed answers, and part of me couldn't deny the macabre lure of unraveling the cemetery's secret. Midnight warnings. My investigation didn't go unnoticed. Word spread among my friends and neighbors that I was wandering the graveyard late at night, peering at gravestones, searching for more statues. Some seemed concerned for my well-being. Others whispered that I was tempting fate, that the sculptor might choose me next. Even so, I couldn't stay away. Late one evening, I climbed into my car and headed back to Maplewood Cemetery, determined to capture photographic evidence. But before I could even start the engine, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. A hoarse voice crackled on the other end. He waits at the stroke of midnight. He watches those who can't resist the pull of secrets. Then the line went dead. My hands trembled as I lowered the phone. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a friend pulling a cruel prank, or some local eccentric stoking the legend. But deep down, I felt that the call was a warning. Still, my curiosity outweighed my fear. I turned the key in the ignition and drove off into the night, the phrase, "he waits at the stroke of midnight," echoing in my head. The sculptor's mark. That night, I arrived at the cemetery just before midnight, stepping onto the gravel path under a sliver of moonlight. My flashlight flickered, casting shaky beams across weathered headstones. As I ventured deeper, I noticed something new. Another statue, partially hidden behind a tall monument. This statue was of a woman, her face frozen in an expression of pure despair, tears seemingly caught mid-flow on her stone cheeks. A faint inscription on the base made my stomach churn. Ecce Preda. I recognized just enough Latin to know it meant, behold the prey. A shiver snaked down my spine. Prey, as if the sculptor was a hunter, stalking those who dared to roam among the dead. Against my better judgment, I reached out to touch the statue's hand. The stone was cold, but it seemed to pulse with an unexplainable energy. I jerked my arm back, nearly dropping my flashlight. Then I heard it, the distinct sound of metal scraping against stone. It was distant yet unmistakable. My heart hammered, urging me to leave, but I was drawn forward, compelled by a grim fascination. I tiptoed around the statue, following the ominous sound, each crunch of gravel underfoot feeling like a betrayal of my better sense. A glimpse of the sculptor. I crept between the rows of graves, guided by that relentless scraping. My surroundings grew darker as the moon sank behind a cluster of gnarled oak trees, leaving only my flashlight to cut through the gloom. Shadows reached out across the ground like twisted claws, and I found myself stepping carefully around them, as if they could pull me down into the earth. Then, just beyond a crypt with a rusted iron door, I saw him, a figure hunched over a block of marble, working with single-minded intensity. The rasp of his chisel rang out into the stillness. He wore a hooded cloak, the folds of fabric obscuring most of his face. In the faint glow of my flashlight, I glimpsed sharp cheekbones and deep-set eyes that seemed to reflect no light at all. I froze, uncertain whether to reveal myself or retreat. In a sudden burst of courage, I lifted my camera, snapping a picture. The flash lit up the area for an instant, revealing scattered tools and unfinished statues around him. The figure's head jerked up. Our eyes met, and my breath caught in my throat. There was something otherworldly in his gaze, something ancient and malevolent. Before I could speak or run, he grabbed his chisel, and the scraping halted. In the silence that followed, I heard my own pulse hammering in my ears. I backed away, my instincts screaming at me to flee. But as I turned, I spotted a new, half-formed statue. To my horror, the features looked disturbingly familiar. Visions of my own face. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I stared at that half-formed statue. Its features were rough, but beneath the chisel marks, I saw a frightening resemblance to my own face. The shape of my jaw, the slope of my nose. Panic surged through me, and my stomach turned sour. I forced my legs to move, to run, but my feet felt as heavy as concrete. The sculptor's presence was palpable, a suffocating aura that weighed on the night air. My thoughts churned. If the rumors were true, that his chisel worked only on those who came here after midnight, then he must have chosen me as his next subject. I don't recall how I finally managed to tear myself away, but I did. My mind blurred as I stumbled back toward the cemetery gates, crashing through low branches and slipping on damp grass. Every shadow seemed to lunge at me, each statue I passed appearing to turn its head, judging my trespass. When I reached my car, I practically dived inside and locked the doors. My chest heaved with ragged breaths as I looked at the camera in my shaking hands. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? I wanted to drive off, never to return. And yet, my curiosity still burned. Why me? Why was he sculpting my face in stone? Uneasy days, haunting nights. Back in the safety of my own apartment, I tried to push the encounter out of my mind. But the moment I closed my eyes, I'd see that statue, my statue, glaring back at me with cold, unfeeling eyes. Sleep eluded me, and when I finally dozed off, I was tormented by nightmares of being encased in stone, unable to move, scream, or even breathe. My days were no better. I found myself checking the corners of every room, anxious that the sculptor might appear. When the phone rang, I hesitated to pick up. Each time a stranger passed me on the street, I wondered if it was him, hidden behind some mundane disguise. I became jumpy and withdrawn, snapping at friends who tried to ask what was wrong. But curiosity gnawed at my insides. I replayed the moment I saw him working in the graveyard. His precise, deliberate motions, the look in his eyes when he noticed me. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't deny something supernatural about him. It was the only explanation for these statues appearing out of nowhere, each one a perfect portrait of dread. I began researching old records in the town library, poring over dusty newspapers and hidden archives. A pattern emerged: eerie disappearances, unexplained sightings, and rumors about a faceless sculptor spanning decades. Was he even human, or something else entirely, lurking just at the edge of human comprehension? Dark histories. Old town records uncovered a chilling name repeatedly linked to rumors of living statues: Alistair Pryce. He was an eccentric sculptor from the 19th century who had once lived in a sprawling mansion near Maplewood Cemetery. According to old journals, he vanished under mysterious circumstances, and townspeople whispered that he had been dabbling in dark rituals. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. Accounts from the time described Alistair's uncanny ability to mold stone as if it were clay. Neighbors recalled hearing frantic cries near his workshop late at night, only to find the place empty and cold by morning. Some swore he'd offered them deals, eternal youth for a price, though no one specified what that price was. Then there were references to the midnight tombstones, cryptic notes that suggested Alistair's chiseling took on a sinister life of its own under the moon's glow. Multiple diaries mentioned the same line: "He shapes not stone but souls." It sent a chill through me. Could it be possible that Alistair Pryce hadn't died but instead transcended mortality, continuing his eerie craft across the centuries? I closed the dusty ledger, hands trembling. I hadn't found any direct evidence linking Pryce to the modern-day statues, but my gut told me they were connected. A part of me wanted to bury this new knowledge and forget it. But if he had chosen me to be his next creation, ignorance was no shield. Midnight returned. Despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I made the choice to confront the terror head-on. Late one night, just before midnight, I parked outside the cemetery once again. The air was crisp, carrying the sense of damp earth and decaying leaves. My breath came out in white puffs as I steeled myself. I armed myself with everything I could think of: a flashlight, my camera, a small recorder to capture any sounds or voices, and even a crowbar, though I doubted a piece of metal would do much against whatever force Alistair Pryce possessed. The graveyard was silent except for the crunch of my shoes on the path. Each step weighed on me, a reminder of what might lurk behind the next gravestone. My plan was simple. If I saw him, I'd try to speak to him, reason with him, learn his motives. In my naivety, I believed understanding might be my salvation. Just as the clock struck midnight, a soft glow appeared behind a cluster of headstones. I followed the light, carefully weaving between statues that seemed to be silently judging me. And then I found him. His hood was down this time, revealing a gaunt face with sunken eyes that flickered with an inhuman glow. The block of stone in front of him appeared to shift beneath his chisel, as though alive and in pain, bargaining with the unseen. My lips parted to speak, but no sound emerged at first. He lifted his gaze from the stone, regarding me with an eerie calm that felt more threatening than any rage. It was as if he already knew what I planned to say. At last, words stumbled out of me. Why are you doing this?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the emptiness. He paused, chisel in hand, and turned fully toward me. For a moment, it seemed he might ignore me entirely. Then his voice, low and resonant, filled the night. "I fashion beauty from mortality," he said, each syllable dripping with an accent lost to time. "Those who wander here after midnight offer me their essence, and I preserve them in stone. It is a gift and a curse." I swallowed hard. His presence was overwhelming, a tangible weight that pressed down on my chest. Yet I pushed forward, heart pounding. "Why me?" He circled around his work, running a hand over the half-formed statue's face. "My face. You sought me out. Curiosity binds you to my chisel. It's too late to run." Desperation fueled my next question. What if I refuse? What if I don't want this? His thin lips curved into a chilling approximation of a smile. "Refusal does not matter." In that instant, the wind howled, and the statues around us seemed to loom closer, an audience to our uneasy bargain. The sculptor's price, An icy dread settled in my bones as I realized just how trapped I was. Alistair Pryce, if that was indeed who stood before me, considered me already claimed. My mind raced, searching for a way out, a means to break the hold he seemed to have over this place. I remembered the old journals, the mention of dark rituals of souls shaped like stone. Could there be a counter-ritual, a way to free those he'd already taken? I had no idea, but a spark of defiance lit inside me. I refused to simply accept my fate. I inched forward, brandishing my crowbar like a talisman. "I won't let you take me," I declared, though my voice quivered. "Stay back." He studied me with those ancient eyes, as though amused. "Your courage is admirable," he said quietly, almost kindly. "But courage is fleeting. Stone is eternal." Lightning suddenly illuminated the sky, revealing the multitude of statues around us. Each face contorted in a final moment of horror, each a testament to his dreadful mastery. My pulse raced, and I could hear my own breath echo in my ears. When the light faded, I was alone in near darkness with him, the solitary witness to his ongoing masterpiece. Unfinished statues. I didn't wait for him to attack first. Swinging the crowbar in a wild arc, I struck at the half-formed statue that bore my likeness, hoping to destroy whatever link he had to me. A shriek, not human, tore through the night, and it took me a moment to realize it came from the statue itself. Cracks spread across its surface, branching like veins of lightning. As they splintered, a wail reverberated through the cemetery, echoing among the gravestones. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the crowbar. Alistair's expression was one of cold fury. "Fool," he snarled, raising his chisel. "You've drawn the attention of those who dwell beyond mortal sight." Dark clouds churned overhead, and the wind picked up, whipping leaves and debris around us. A strange luminescence flickered in the broken statue's cracks. I didn't understand what was happening, but panic seized me, and I scrambled to put distance between myself and the horrifying scene. Behind me, I could hear the rumble of shifting stone as other statues trembled, their lifelike faces twisting as if trying to break free. Alistair stood amidst them, arms raised, as though communing with an unseen force. In that moment, I realized the rumors and legends fell short of the real horror before me. This was something truly unearthly, and I had unleashed it. Pursuit in the dark. I turned and ran, weaving between gravestones, my flashlight jittering wildly with each frantic step. My lungs burned as I fought to put as much distance as possible between me and the chaos. In the darkness, every statue became a potential threat, a silent sentinel that might suddenly move, speak, or reach out. Behind me, I heard what sounded like multiple footfalls in pursuit, yet I saw no one when I risked a glance over my shoulder. A hiss like shifting gravel whispered through the rows of tombstones, as if the ground itself was shifting. The wrought iron gates came into view, a beacon of escape. I sprinted toward them, heart hammering, mind reeling with terror. Just as I approached, lightning flashed again, illuminating the silhouette of a figure on the other side, still and imposing. My flashlight beam caught the glint of metal in his hand. The chisel. Alistair Pryce had somehow beaten me there. Skidding to a halt, I searched desperately for another way out. The cemetery's high stone walls loomed on either side, too tall to climb in my current state. I faced him, chest heaving. He wore a look of grim determination, as though I were nothing more than a wayward piece of marble to be shaped into his design. A desperate gamble. I knew I couldn't outrun him forever. Gasping for air, I tightened my grip on the crowbar and stared him down. If I couldn't flee, I'd have to fight. The realization both terrified and galvanized me. He advanced slowly, chisel raised. "You cannot destroy what has endured centuries," he said. The words churned my stomach, but I clung to the idea that maybe I didn't have to destroy him. Maybe I could weaken whatever dark power he wielded. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward, swinging the crowbar at his arm. He moved with unnatural speed, sidestepping my blow as if I were moving through water. Still, I caught a glimpse of genuine surprise in his eyes. Then I remembered the statue that had screamed when I struck it. Perhaps his power was tied to each statue. Perhaps damaging them could diminish him. Without a word, I spun around, running back into the sea of gravestones, praying I'd find another of his cursed works to destroy. I heard him snarl behind me, and the chase resumed. There was no logical plan, just a gut instinct that if the statues held pieces of souls, maybe I could set them free and break Alistair's control. The cemetery felt infinite in the darkness, each step a risk as statues loomed with outstretched arms and petrified faces. Yet I pressed on, fueled by desperation and a dwindling flicker of hope. Hidden mausoleum. Amid my frantic flight, I nearly tripped over a fallen headstone. My flashlight's beam swung wildly, revealing a dilapidated mausoleum at the edge of the cemetery. Overgrown vines clung to its walls, and a rusted iron gate stood half open, beckoning like a crooked finger. I made a snap decision. Hurriedly, I slipped inside, hoping to buy myself a moment to catch my breath and plan. The interior smelled of damp stone and something musty, old bones perhaps. My flashlight revealed rows of shelves holding dusty urns and crumbling coffins. A faint glow emanated from deeper within, drawing me like a moth to a candle. Rounding a corner, I discovered a hidden chamber. There, illuminated by flickering candlelight, stood a cluster of half-carved statues. Each statue looked abandoned in varying states of horror, eyes bulging, mouths twisted in silent screams. This must have been Alistair's hidden workshop. My heart thudded. Could destroying these unfinished pieces weaken him? I raised the crowbar, poised to strike, but something made me pause. A whisper, almost inaudible, weaved through the darkness. It was as though the statues themselves were pleading. Their eyes, though made of stone, seemed alive with terror. A surge of empathy clashed with my need for survival. The soul in the stone. Clutching the crowbar, I hovered near the nearest statue, its features barely carved beyond an outline of a face contorted in anguish. That faint whisper continued, tugging at the edges of my mind. It felt like a plea, a soul trapped inside, yearning for release. I could hear Alistair outside the mausoleum, calling in a voice that resonated through stone and bone alike. You cannot hide. I can feel your pulse, your fear. His footsteps echoed closer, and I realized time was running out. My resolve hardened. With a quick inhale, I slammed the crowbar against the statue's chest. Stone fragments flew, and an otherworldly scream reverberated in the cramped chamber. A gust of frigid air burst from the fracture, knocking me back. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging. One by one, I attacked each half-finished statue, feeling that strange energy surge and dissipate each time stone shattered. With every blow, the whispers seemed to soften, as though hundreds of trapped souls were finally finding release. Yet with each strike, the mausoleum quaked. A dreadful roar from outside signaled Alistair's fury. Something told me my time was nearly up. His power or his wrath was building to a breaking point. I destroyed the last statue just as Alistair's shadow fell across the chamber entrance. The crowbar slipped from my hands, my arms trembling with exhaustion. A hush enveloped the room, broken only by Alistair's ragged breathing and the dying flicker of candlelight. Shattered power. Alistair Pryce stood in the doorway, face contorted in fury. Candles flickered behind him, casting dancing shadows that made his figure appear monstrous. As he stepped closer, I noticed his chisel, once so formidable, now chipped and dull. Even from where I stood, I could sense that destroying the unfinished statues had weakened whatever bond gave him strength. He raised the damaged chisel, aiming it at me as though it were a weapon. "You meddling wretch," he spat. "You've undone centuries of my work." His voice cracked, no longer resonant and mesmerizing, but raw with rage. I felt a surge of courage. "You've tormented innocent people for too long," I said, my words echoing in the cramped space. "No more." Alistair lunged at me. I dodged clumsily, nearly losing my footing on the rubble-strewn floor. He swung the chisel wildly, each blow glancing off the stone walls with a metallic screech. Sparks flew, and shards of stone pelted my face. Although he fought with unnatural speed, it was clear his powers were waning. The mausoleum itself seemed to protest his presence. With each heavy strike, cracks formed along the ancient walls. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The structural integrity was failing, and soon the entire place might collapse. The final confrontation. Desperate to end this nightmare, I grabbed the chisel's handle, struggling with Alistair in a dangerous tug-of-war. His hands were cold and impossibly strong, yet I sensed the faint tremor of weakness pulsing through his grip. "Your fate was sealed the moment you stepped among the tombstones," he snarled, pressing his weight against me. I could feel his breath on my cheek, icy and rancid, like old grave dirt. My mind raced, searching for a last resort. The half-formed statue of me had been destroyed, which had severed his direct claim. But Alistair himself remained. If there was any justice, any cosmic retribution for the souls he'd imprisoned, perhaps it rested in his own tools. Summoning every ounce of strength, I twisted the chisel toward him. The jagged edge nicked his forearm, drawing dark, viscous blood that almost seemed to steam in the cold air. Alistair let out a howl of agony, stumbling backward, his hood falling away completely. His features writhed as though his face were trying to rearrange itself. The mausoleum quaked more violently, and I braced myself against a nearby column. Alistair's eyes were wide, filled with an emotion I never expected to see in such a creature: fear. He lunged again, but the ceiling groaned ominously, and chunks of stone began raining down. It was now or never. I had to escape before the entire structure buried us both. Collapse and revelation. I dodged collapsing columns, broken statues, and swirling dust as I fled the mausoleum. Behind me, I heard Alistair's enraged screams echoing in the darkness, but they were soon drowned out by the thunderous crash of stone. Outside, the graveyard was awash in spectral moonlight. Statues stood silent, their once terrifying expressions lifeless and still. It was as if they'd reverted to mere hunks of stone, devoid of any trace of the souls they once held. I risked a backward glance at the mausoleum. The entrance was blocked by rubble, and through the gaps in the fallen stone, I saw no movement. Exhaustion and relief warred within me. I wasn't sure if Alistair was entombed or merely biding his time, but for now, the graveyard was silent. A wave of nausea hit me as I staggered toward the gates. My mind reeled at the night's events, the supernatural horror of living statues, the malevolent sculptor, the primal battle for survival. When I finally stepped onto the gravel path leading back to my car, my knees nearly buckled. I leaned against a crooked tombstone to steady myself. Dawn was just beginning to break, painting the sky with pale shades of blue and pink. For the first time in what felt like forever, I took in the cool morning air, grateful to still be able to breathe. The lingering curse. In the days that followed, I found myself returning to the cemetery, oddly compelled to confirm that the statues remained lifeless. Each time I visited, the rubble at the mausoleum's entrance was undisturbed. No sign of movement beneath the collapsed stones. The townspeople, curious about the ruined building, chalked it up to old age and neglect. They never suspected the truth. Sometimes, late at night, I'd dream of Alistair Pryce stepping out from behind a tombstone, chisel gleaming, ready to finish what he started. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, half expecting to find my limbs turned to stone. Yet morning always came, and I remained flesh and blood. Word spread that the graveyard was safe again. No new statues had appeared since the mausoleum collapse. Still, a sense of unease clung to the place, as though the shadows themselves remembered the terror once housed there. The rumor persisted that if anyone foolishly wandered among the tombstones after midnight, they risked attracting the attention of the Graveyard Sculptor. Perhaps the darkness he embodied can never truly be destroyed, only sealed away for a time. I share my story now as both warning and confession. I ventured into the graveyard, lured by rumors and haunted by curiosity. I faced a horror beyond understanding and narrowly escaped. If you find yourself drawn to old cemeteries under a moonlit sky, remember, Some secrets are carved from nightmares, and some sculptures are better left unfinished.